Welcome to Fear Street.
Nothing is more terrible than losing a loved one. Everyone knows that. This reality hit home for me over 20 years ago, when I lost the love of my life. We'd been childhood sweethearts, and we finally married several years later when we were both 21. But I lost him on our honeymoon in a motorbike accident. I felt guilty for surviving. I'd always been afraid of ghost stories, and was even more so after he passed away, doing my best to make sure I was never alone. Even though I would have loved to see him again, the idea of seeing his spirit was just too much for me. My family took me to stay in a log cabin in the woods, which my husband would have loved, as he was a nature lover. Even though my parents cooked down and tried to get me involved, all I wanted to do was sleep so I could avoid the grief. Early one morning, I felt like I was being watched, and I freaked out. I decided to get up and go for a walk on my own in the woods. Seeing the mist put me in a dreamy frame of mind, and I wandered along in a trance. I tried not to think about my husband and the feeling I had had when I woke up, but the sensation hit me again as I approached the top of the first hill. Not knowing what to do, I stood still and looked around, totally confused. My hair prickled and my blood froze when I saw the apparition of a woman in a crimson dress, further up the trail. I gasped when I realized her dress was totally soaked in blood. I'd smelled the blood, but I'd put it down to being in the woods. She kept her head bowed, as her long black hair seemed to blend into the dress, and the blood continued flowing onto the ground around her. I could hear quiet weeping and sorrowful moans. I started to slowly step backwards, but she floated closer towards me with each step I took. Shaking with fear, my mind scrambled to figure out what to do. Then the woman slowly looked up from under the long strands of hair hanging over her face. I saw large dark eyes staring at me, and her scarlet lips trembling as she wept. When she brought her hands up to clasp together against her chest, I saw that they were covered in blood. I turned and began to run down the hill, but skidded to a stop when I saw her ahead of me, having zoomed to that position in a split second. I darted off into the trees, but it didn't matter where I went. She continued to appear in a flash, moaning, weeping, and clasping her blood-soaked hands to her chest, all the time getting closer and closer. I felt like I was trapped. I raced away one more time, and she materialized directly in front of me, now reaching her hands out and drawing me in for a deathly hug. I screamed as I felt her cold, wet body squeezing me to her, feeling the blood seeping into my own clothes and smelling the scent of death all around me. Her hideous face was only centimeters away from mine. I yelled, "What do you want? Please, let me go." I pulled away from her as hard as I could. She looked into my eyes and chilled my bones as I panted in blasts of cold air. She spoke telepathically to me, as I didn't see her lips move, apart from trembling. "I will let you go if you let him in." She leaned in and planted a cold, bloody kiss on my cheek. Somehow I knew what she meant, and I struggled a little more, until it dawned on me that the only way I could get away from her was to agree. "Okay, I will. Just let me go." In an instant, she vanished, and I was left on my own, or so I thought. I turned around and saw my husband there, surrounded in a golden halo, and smiling with his arms out. I ran to him and felt his arms wrap around me. Sobbing into his chest, I cried out, "How is this happening?" He stroked my hair and whispered, I wanted to say goodbye. She brought us together through her own grief. After the long goodbye, he vanished, but I saw the woman smiling through her own sadness. She slowly started moving further and further away, just as she had approached moments earlier. I felt an overwhelming sense that she was still profoundly sad, but felt happy that she was able to give us what she had longed for, just one more moment with a loved one who had passed away. I'm not proud of the fact that many years ago, I was a juvenile delinquent living on the streets of a major city. Having fled a turbulent home at the age of 15, I took off with my piggy bank and a backpack with high hopes. A month later, I was scourging for food and hard-pressed to find a suitable bed when nighttime came around. I made a friend on the streets named Mia, a 17-year-old girl who became like a protective older sister. We enjoyed investigating abandoned buildings and scaring the hell out of each other by telling scary stories. One night it was raining hard, and we stumbled across a gateway in a tunnel that led to an abandoned subway. Something told me it wasn't a good idea to go in there, but it had nothing whatsoever to do with breaking the law. Mia pushed forward and dragged me with her, getting us out of the rain, but into a dark, spooky series of tunnels. It took time to get used to the basic sounds, like dripping water, squealing rats, and far-off clangs of metal. What I couldn't get used to were the blasts of icy air, disembodied voices, and the shadows moving across the walls. We both stopped in our tracks when an angry voice rumbled loudly. I grabbed Mia's sleeve when we heard it say, "Get out of here." We both screamed and ran for our lives. The thing was, we were lost in the seemingly endless tunnels, and every turn led us deeper into the subway. Finally, Mia grew tired, and when we came across a dry section with old mattresses, she decided that we'd stay. I cried and pleaded with her, telling her that I didn't want to sleep on dirty mattresses, but she was indignant. Watching her lie down with her head on her bag, I resigned myself to sitting next to her and staying awake. She was soon fast asleep, and my senses were heightened as I strained my eyes and ears for any kind of threat. It didn't take long for the shadows to appear, some darting around, and others slowly peering out from corners. I jumped when I saw an apparition of an old man in overalls and a helmet walking towards us. He was glaring angrily. He was transparent yet very real to me, so I shook Mia to try to wake her up, but she continued snoring. Shaking and whimpering, I asked, "What do you want?" He stopped 3 feet in front of me and growled. I froze when he continued walking right through me, leaving me chilled to the core and screaming. Mia stirred and punched me in the hip before going back to sleep. It wasn't long before more ghosts came out. I tried to shake her and yelled, "Wake up! Look!" But she ignored me. Then I saw 3 people running around. 2 were women in 1920s clothes, looking like they were running to catch a train. Then I saw a homeless man. Thinking that he was real, I asked him, "Please, can you help us?" He turned and shook his head, then disappeared. Finally, I screamed in Mia's ear, "I'm leaving." This woke her up, and even though she complained, she came too. As soon as we started running through the tunnel, a bunch of shadow people rushed past us, along with other ghosts. One young man who looked like an old-fashioned policeman yelled, as he flew by, "You'll never get out." We screamed and cried as we made our way to what appeared to be an exit, which was barred by an angry nurse. She was cackling like a witch as we skidded to a halt. Suddenly, Mia stiffened. Then she slowly turned to face me. My flesh crawled when Mia's eyes grew as big as golf balls, black and creepy. Then she walked off on her own down the tunnel as I screamed and pleaded with her to come back. I don't know. I'm not proud of it, but I was so scared I just barged through the exit door, out into the rain, leaving Mia behind. I was terrified. I didn't know what to do, but I somehow made my way to a nearby police station. I frantically told the officer at the front desk what happened. He said they'd look into it, but I don't think he really believed me. As far as I know, they never conducted a search for her. But why would they, right? I mean, to them we were just a couple of delinquent homeless kids. I never saw Mia again. I can't really explain this, but I've always been able to see weird things other people can't. As a child growing up in my house, I'd experienced things my sister and parents weren't able to. Sometimes I could catch a shadow figure in the hallway when I knew no one else was home. or I'd notice things were moved, like a pot or pan, but nobody else would pick up on it. I'm not saying I'm clairvoyant or anything, just that I'm able to notice these activities when no one else can. About a year ago, my wife and I decided to take a trip to Lassen Peak to do some hiking. I like to take hikes in the woods, although my wife doesn't share the same passion. She gets bored very quickly. My idea of a good time is going fishing or camping. Her idea of a good time is playing on her laptop and drinking red wine. Somehow, I convinced her to take a couple days off from work, and she agreed to go hiking with me. We decided to take a journey during the winter, as I like how the scenery looks in the cold months. I've been hiking in a lot of great trails since I moved to California a couple of years ago, but I've never been to Lassen Peak. I had heard the views from the top were really breathtaking, as you can see the areas from where it had erupted in the past. We got to the trail later on in the afternoon. It was 5 miles long, so I figured we could get it done in about 2 to 3 hours. I remember starting the trail, and I couldn't shake this feeling like someone was watching us. I kept turning around, thinking I'd see somebody staring back at me. After I did this a few times, my wife asked me what I was doing. When I told her I felt like someone was watching us, she said I was just being paranoid. About a couple miles into the trail, my wife and I would stop to take in the scenery. As I looked around, I saw a figure slowly walk behind some trees and then disappear. I told my wife, but again, she said I was just being paranoid. The farther we walked on the trail, the more I felt like there was a presence stalking us. After a while, we were on the last mile and nightfall was approaching. This is when I started to hear voices, whispers that sounded like they were coming from the woods. I asked my wife what they were, and she said she couldn't hear anything. Just as the whispers stopped, I saw a faceless figure appear just up ahead of the trail. And I mean faceless. He had no eyes, nose, or mouth. He was right in front of us, but my wife was standing there like nothing was happening. When I looked back at the man, he was gone. When I asked my wife why she didn't seem to be alarmed, she told me she hadn't seen anybody. To this day, I know I saw something. It wasn't just my imagination running away from me. There was someone or something on the trail with us. What it was exactly, I don't know. There are things that happen in everyday life that we're unable to explain. Images, sounds, and movements that frighten our psyche and make us question if what we witnessed actually happened, or if it's just part of our wild imaginations. One of these events happened to me last month. I live in California, in the San Francisco Bay Area. I like to take frequent hikes through the trails close to my apartment. It's always been a hobby of mine. I've always had this fascination with nature. I love taking in landscapes of forests, absorbing the peaceful environment around me. Usually I take walks with friends who share my passion, but oftentimes I feel like they can slow me down. A lot of my buddies aren't in the best physical shape, so they can often complain and move kind of slowly. On this particular day, I got home from work around 5 and decided to take a hike by myself. It was cool outside, so I decided to jog the hike, which was about 4 miles in length. I passed by a few other people on the trail, but not many. There didn't seem to be a lot of people hiking on this day. As I neared the end of the first pass, it started to get a little darker out, and I didn't see anyone else on the trail. For some reason, even though I didn't see anybody, I got the eerie sense that I was being followed by something. I started to quicken my pace. After the halfway point, dusk was upon me, and out of nowhere, it started to get foggy out. The air around me started to turn into a dark, gray haze. At first, it was just a thin layer, but as my hike continued, it started to get so bad that I couldn't see 6 feet in front of me. My heart rate started jacking up with the feeling of something still following me through the fog. I wanted to turn around and convince myself I was imagining things, but I was too afraid to stop. Sick of feeling paranoid, I came to a sudden stop. I turned around, and there through the haze was a woman, standing a few yards away from me. I knew there was no one else on the trail, as I didn't pass anybody after the halfway point. Panicking, I started running as fast as I could, back to my car. I looked back again, and the woman was still the same distance away. She just stood there, looking right through me. I just kept running, hoping to get away from the mysterious figure. My heart was pounding, sweat was dripping from my forehead as I breathed heavily. I was about to have a panic attack until I noticed the fog was suddenly disappearing from around me. I looked back, and the mysterious woman had vanished. I kept running quickly to the end of the trail, finally reaching my car. Ever since that day, I've been too afraid to take hikes alone. That was 1 month ago. I've replayed the events in my head, trying to convince myself that I'm not crazy. I don't know what that mysterious figure in the fog wanted, but I feel in my bones that I barely escaped with my life that day. Surrounded in a golden